as I said, I'm Staci Williams, and I'm one of the interns this year. And next year I'll be going on staff here at NAU, so you'll get to see a lot more of me as time goes on. Now, many of you probably could never guess that, but I've never given a large group talk before, and honestly never thought I would, never wanted to. I spent years perfecting the art of being invisible, and avoiding things like this that would cause me to be seen or especially embarrassed. And for those of you who've seen the movie Princess Diaries, it's like when Anne Hathaway says that her only goal in life is to be invisible, and she's good at it. That was me. So I wanted to show you a couple of pictures so you can understand just how hard I tried to be invisible, and often this involved my best friend, Karen. So the first slide is us, our freshman year, dressing up as Newsies for Halloween. That's from the Disney movie Newsies, for those of you who don't know, the young Christian Bale singing and dancing, so you should see it if you haven't. Second one is actually the same day, but after we'd taken our costumes off, we decided to try and hang spoons from our noses. But we only had plastic spoons, and for those of you who haven't done it, plastic spoons don't hang off your nose. It just doesn't work. But rather than concede defeat, we decided to simply lean our heads back and lay the spoons on our faces and then take a picture. The next one is us at California Adventure outside the Monsters, Inc. ride, pretending to drive away from the monsters and also pretending that my cousin Rachel is a really bad driver, which she's not, thankfully. The next one is us at Sedona. She was texting someone, I don't know who or why or anything, but I decided to try and surprise her from behind, but she could actually see me out of the corner of her eye, so it didn't work very well, but I enjoyed doing it. And the last one is us at graduation. You can tell we're, just so excited. We're, done with college. It's a very serious moment. Parents want to take pictures to remember it, and this is the faces that they get. So, okay, maybe I didn't always succeed at being invisible, and Karen was actually quite good about making sure that that didn't happen. Now that I'm an intern, I'm really not allowed to be invisible anymore, and even less so as staff next year. So, here I am, giving a talk, and I actually finally understand why everyone brings a water bottle up with them, because your mouth and throat really do get dry. Didn't understand that before. But seriously, giving this talk is really intimidating for me. It's been easy for me to come up with all sorts of excuses as to why I shouldn't be giving this talk. I've had nightmares about losing my talk the night before, either through my papers flying away in the wind, or just my computer crashing and losing the document, or I've even thought about just getting up here and fainting dead away and being carried out. But I am here, obviously, and I didn't let those fears keep me from doing this. And in the scripture that I'm about to read you, we get to see Paul persevere through some hardships as well. The passage is from Acts 16, and lucky for me, it's only 5 verses long, so I don't have to talk about much. But it's not actually true. But it'll be up on the screen behind me for those of you who want to follow along, and you'll have to forgive my pronunciation. I'm not a Bible scholar, so I don't know how all these names are pronounced, so we'll just pretend I get them all right. Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. When they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So, in this passage, we see Paul go to 6 different places to preach the gospel. He's already been traveling for many months, telling people about Jesus. But now, for some reason, God is preventing him from teaching. He's in the province of Asia, but God prevents him from preaching. He goes to Phrygia, but the Holy Spirit stops him from preaching. He goes to Galatia, but the Holy Spirit stops him from preaching. Next he goes to Mysia and Bithynia, and you can guess, God stops him from preaching. By the time he reaches Troas, he's got to be pretty fed up. I mean, he's doing what God called him to do, telling people about Jesus so they can be saved. But now, for whatever reason, God isn't letting him do it. Now, I don't know about you, but this would bug me a lot. I mean, I feel like telling God, hey, how come you're not letting me do what you told me to do in the first place? For Paul, it must have been discouraging to be kept from what God told him to do, to continually meet this brick wall that he can't get by. It had to be frustrating because God didn't give him any new information. God didn't tell him why he's doing this. And Paul had to be tired, really tired at this point. Physically, from all the traveling he's doing, hundreds of miles between all these places. Spiritually, because he's trying to do what God called him to and it's not working. And emotionally, because God's behavior is just confusing and unexplained. And what is Paul's response in the midst of all this? He keeps going. When God stops him at one city, he just moves on to the next until he finally hears from God. He perseveres through his discouragement, lack of direction from God, and fatigue to continue sharing the story of Jesus. And those are the three main points that I'm going to focus on tonight. And I'll show you how Paul's situation relates to me personally and to all of us right now where we're at. Water. So the first thing we see is that Paul kept being prevented from sharing the gospel by God, even though that was what God called him to do. He didn't get to tell people about Jesus, see them get saved, or help a church grow, things he'd been doing in lots of other cities. In 6 cities, one after the other, God turns Paul away. By city number 6, Paul had to be discouraged, wondering what he was doing wrong or what God was just doing in general. I probably would have been discouraged by about city number 3 and never even made it to city number 4, let alone 6. And while I haven't been discouraged from having to travel to 6 different cities, thankfully, I have felt discouraged by other things. As some of you know, I lead 2 prayer walks every week. I advertise them on Facebook, I text reminders to people if I have their number, and I talk to people about them at large group, at my small group, or whenever it just comes up in conversation. Yet, almost once a week, I sit there for 15 minutes, waiting, hoping, praying that people will show up. And they don't. I've got a 50-50 shot for people showing up, and that's discouraging. All the way back in January, I got the idea from God to start prayer walking the campus. I prayed about it and talked about it with the staff and interns. I wanted to be sure that this was from God before I started doing it. But I felt sure, so I began telling people to come meet me so that we could prayer walk on the campus. The first day, I had 11 people show up, and I was thrilled that 11 people were going to join me in what God was calling me to do. But the next prayer walk I led, no one showed. And that's been the pattern ever since. Sometimes people show, and the numbers have varied from 1 to 11. Other times no one shows. And each time that happens, I go home asking God why he asked me to do this when no one comes. It's really discouraging. And I'm not telling you this to guilt you into coming, so don't think that's my point. The reason I'm telling this story is because it's honestly how I feel, and it's the best example I have right now for how to relate to Paul in this passage. I'm sure some of you can relate as well. We've all been discouraged in our lives at some point or another. Maybe it's because the friends you invite to come to the large group don't show. Or maybe it's because your family doesn't get the whole Christian thing and are just waiting for you to move on. Or maybe it's because you try to talk to people about Jesus, your friends, classmates, random strangers in the union, and they just don't care. Whatever it is, it's discouraging and it hurts. The second thing we see in the passage is that Paul also didn't have a lot of details about God's plan for him. He'd been called to tell the people, the non-Jewish community, about Jesus. So that's what he was trying to do. He kept going to different cities to tell people about Jesus, and God kept stopping him. But God wasn't telling him where he should be going, or why he shouldn't be going to that particular city. No, God just said, "Not here, Paul, move along." And when finally God did speak to Paul, giving him the vision in Troas, it was super vague. A man tells Paul to come over to Macedonia and help us. It's not a lot of information, it's just a destination. And Macedonia is modern-day Greece, so it's a whole country, not a street address. The frustration that comes from not having all the details of a plan is a very familiar frustration to me. Anyone who knows me knows how much I like planning and organizing. I mean, I'm a little too organized, and it makes me look a little crazy. For example, I have organized my DVDs alphabetically and by time length, so I can find them any manner of way. But there are times when God has called me to something and only given me like 10% of the information, and it drives me nuts. For instance, the story of how I became an intern starts out this way. My junior year of college, I discovered that I had no passion for my major, interior design, and I had no desire to go into that career field. So where did that leave me? All summer, I was praying to God for direction, asking Him where He wanted me to go. At the end of the summer, I finally felt Him call me to ministry. But He didn't tell me, what kind of ministry, or what organization, or where to start looking for an opportunity. He didn't give me any of that. So it wasn't even until October that I even began to consider the Intervarsity internship. Once I got the internship, I wasn't told all of the details about the responsibilities I'd have. It was only at the end of that summer I found out I had to give a talk here at large group. Not thrilled about that one. Lead students through training for proxy stations and leading a small group. So I signed up for God's call, and bit by bit as time went on, I found out new things it meant that I had to do. And it's been very frustrating since I like to know things, like way in advance, like a year in advance, so that I had lots of time to prepare for it. So, many of you, probably most of you, don't need as many details as I do, but you still like to have some idea of what's coming or where God's leading you. I mean, maybe God's called you to a leadership position, but you don't know which one yet. Maybe He's asked you to switch majors, but you're not sure which major to switch to. Or maybe it's as simple as, being told you had to go to chapter camp because you're a leader, but no one told you why it was so important or what you learned at chapter camp. Sometimes God just doesn't tell us the whole plan. He just gives us the first step that He wants us to take. Or He'll give us a goal to reach, but He doesn't give you a plan for reaching that goal. It can be really frustrating and confusing. Paul experienced this in a big way, as it meant for him traveling from one city to the next until God decided to let him preach. He had a goal, but no direction, in the sense that he didn't know which city he should go to, not that he couldn't find his way to the cities. It's pretty clear he could do that. But despite the lack of direction, he did keep going. He didn't give up at city number 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. He probably would have kept going until city 20 or something, until God told him what to do. The last thing that we see in this passage is that Paul must have been tired. He'd been traveling for a long time, and God kept preventing him from preaching in each city, which meant he had to pick up his walking stick and move on to the next city. And, unlike us, he didn't have a car that could go 75 miles an hour. So he had to be wearing down physically, for sure. But more than that, emotionally and spiritually, he also had to be tired. God had told him to preach, but God was the one stopping him from preaching. It didn't make a lot of sense. Paul was leading a group with him as well. In verse 6 it says, Paul and his companions. So it wasn't just Paul that had to keep moving, but the other people with him as well. How would we feel if we were leading a group of friends on a journey we felt called to by God, but God kept making us keep moving, not letting us preach like He said to? It's like in Lord of the Rings. Oh yes, there's a Lord of the Rings reference. Gandalf tries to lead the Fellowship up the mountain to get to Mordor, but it doesn't work because there's too much snow and wind and, magic stuff going on in there. So they have to go all the way back down this mountain to try a different route. And, climbing a mountain, that'd be really tiring. This kind of fatigue, the pressure of leading others, the wondering why God's being so confusing, the physical strain of doing what God asked, it's not very unfamiliar. Just like I know you all know this feeling, so do I. It's where I'm at right now. For several weeks now, I've felt like I'm constantly working for God, moving from one event to the next, often having them overlap each other. There are my weekly prayer walks, which, as I said, have been discouraging for me. There was Release 2012, an event that takes a lot of time and energy to plan, and the cause that we were focusing on, sex trafficking, is it's a very passionate cause of mine, and so it took a drain on my emotions as well. Then there was chapter camp, which I helped figure out scholarships for people and arrange rides, and now most of you know that that's basically a part-time job in and of itself. Then there was Vision Week, which I had to plan a prayer event for. I attended other events, and I helped students understand why we were doing all of this and why it was important. And throughout all of these events have been the pressures of fundraising my budget, because I'm going on staff and that's what we have to do, writing and preparing for this talk, which, again, really, really difficult. And then, I'm getting ready for my best friend's wedding next weekend. I'm a bridesmaid in it, so there's responsibilities for that. So it's a lot to handle, and it's even just a lot to say. It takes like 5 minutes to get all of that out. I'm exhausted. And there have been days when I ask God, why do I have to do so much? Why is it so hard? If I'm being honest, I thought it would be easier than this. I know, right? Silly me, thinking ministry would be easy. And while you may not have the pressures of an Intervarsity intern, I was a student just last year, and I know that you get tired too. It's the middle of spring semester, so that means you've taken 2 sets of midterms and 1 set of finals. You've had plenty of tests to cram for and take, lots of projects, both individual and group, to complete, and there are personal pressures on top of the academic ones. Maybe you have a boyfriend or girlfriend that takes up extra time in your week, or maybe you don't, and that causes some emotional baggage. Maybe you're nearing the end of college and you're having to try and figure out what you're going to do when you graduate. Others of you are trying to figure out what you're going to do while you're in college. And if you've been involved in Intervarsity for any length of time now, we've been asking a lot of you. There have been events, invitations, trips, challenges, etc. So we're all exhausted, just like Paul. This is what I want you to hear, though, before I close. Paul was just trying to do what God asked him to do. He just wanted to tell people about Jesus. But after 6 attempts, and 6 times of being told no, he was discouraged. He was frustrated by the lack of details in God's plan, and he was tired. But he didn't give up. He kept going. He went to 6 different cities until God showed up. He persevered until God told him what to do. Even though it had been difficult, and he had every excuse to give up and blame God for keeping him from this mission, he didn't. And that's the point we're all at right now. Me, you, everyone in this room. We've all experienced the same hardships as Paul. But right now we have a choice. We can choose to stop at city number 2 through 5. We can choose to give up. We have lots of excuses, like it's too hard, maybe I got it wrong, or simply, I don't know what to do now. The list goes on. But we also have a choice to keep going. We can choose to push through the hardships, knowing God will show up some way, somehow, sometime. So will you? Will you keep going? Will you stick to the decision you made, even though you're discouraged, you don't know the whole plan, and you're tired? I want you to take this decision seriously. It's not easy, and it shouldn't be made lightly. This is a decision I personally have had to make several times in the past few months, and often I need to remind myself why I'm doing this, why I'm persevering, and why it's so important that I keep going. For me, that reason is my friend Michelle. In January, she said yes to becoming a Christian, and I had the honor of being there for that and of being able to pray with her. We sat in her dorm room, and she repeated a prayer after me, telling God that she believed what the Bible said about Jesus, and that she wanted to live her life following him. It was a monumentous event. It was huge, and it still just brings a goofy smile to my face thinking about how it felt. So when I think about quitting, I think of Michelle, and I remember why I'm doing this. If I can be there for other people making that same decision, or help students get together for their friends, it's all worth it. So what is your reason? Maybe it's something that happened this year, like a friend becoming a Christian. Or maybe it's as simple as just seeing yourself grow, or seeing someone grow in your small group. Or it could even be a future goal, something you're still waiting to see happen. On your seat when you sat down, there was a little 3x5 card and a pencil, or there was a pencil in the seat next to you. You have to share. I want you to think about what might be keeping you from persevering, or what might be tempting you to give up. Whatever it is, whatever God brings to your mind, I want you to write it down on that note card. And then I want you to turn the card over, and on the other side, I want you to write down your reason for persevering. It's a really powerful thing to have a physical reminder of why we keep going. So I want you to keep this card and then put it someplace where you'll see it every day to remind yourself to keep going. We're going to have Herbert come up and play a little music, and while he does, I want you to write down your excuse and write down your reason for persevering. And then I want to invite you to pray about persevering through that excuse. Ask God to help you remember your reason, to keep going when things get hard. And if any of you are feeling discouraged tonight or have felt the temptation to give up, there are going to be people standing in the back of the room who will pray for you. So I want you to feel free to get up and ask for prayer if you feel called to get that. But again, I want to encourage you to be writing down these reasons, these things, because it's a really powerful thing. And just let God speak to you in this.